I am going to roll out a slab. I have my block of clay here. I'm going to try and cut it just a little bit thicker than what I want for a good even thickness. That's a good way to start to make a slab. It takes a lot of the work of the rolling pin out of it if you just cut a thick, relatively even slice off with your wire. And about once a minute, I'm going to stop and flip it upside down. And flipping it upside down helps evenly stretch it out on the upper face and the back face. If you don't have a good rolling pin at home, you could use something like a straight-walled wine bottle. I notice as I flip my slab over that as my table spot gets damp from where I was working, the clay has a tendency to start to stick there. So when I flip it over, I'm going to try and flip it to a dry spot on the table so that it releases and doesn't stick to the surface. Okay, I think this is a good thickness to start working with. That is about 3/8 of an inch thick, and for me this is a good medium thickness. You could make your pieces a little thicker or a little thinner, especially if you want your pieces to have a certain feeling of delicacy or sturdiness, but this is medium. Before I start to work with this slab though, I'm going to compress the surface with my rubber rib. I'm working on a piece of canvas, so my slab has the imprint of the weave of the canvas in it, which I don't want to have on my pieces. But I'm also compressing the surface. I'm compressing the entire slab itself. It's going to make the slab stronger. I'm going to flip it over and compress on the back side too. And it's going to help prevent cracks in the pieces. It's kind of this invisible little step you do, but it's really important in making sure your pieces don't crack, especially if you're making larger plates. Anytime the clay is stretched out in a low, flat form, it's just super prone to cracking. And compressing the slabs is what you need to do to help prevent that. Most of the time when I build with slabs, I'm going to let it sit for a while. So this is really soft right now. It's kind of just like cream cheese consistency. Even if I tried to just like cut a straight line in it, I wouldn't be able to because it's so soft. So I'm probably going to roll out all my slabs for this project and then let them sit for several hours, or maybe let them set loosely draped in plastic overnight, and then I'm going to start building with them. So a drop mold is a form that you make that you can drop a slab into to get a particular consistent curved shape. There are lots of different ways you can make a drop mold. I'm going to show you a pretty straightforward, simple one here to make an oval dish. This is a big fat coil of clay, and I'm going to roll it out. It's going to be the outline shape of the plate that I want. That's going to set the shape and the angle of the rim. It's a really simple technique for making a lot of quick slab plates that are all the same shape and size. I think this will be a good size for an oval dinner plate. I'm going to do some more shaping on this mold form. I'm going to take this side wall and angle it so that the slab will drape in there nicely. I'm also going to use a rib on this to make a consistent curve. Basically, what I'm doing right now is making the negative shape. This is the shape that's going to be underneath the rim. If you're going to make a mold form, spend some time with it, because the more even and consistent and symmetrical and controlled the curve is on this, you'll bring that quality to all of your plates also. So it's really worth your time to work on this and get out all the little bumps and work on the curve of it and get it exactly the way you want it. But I have one over here that I made yesterday that has a more unique shape to it. So this one I'm going to try out for the first time. You can see the degree to which I finished it and set the curve. Now that it's been sitting for a day or two, this is stiffened up to cheese hard. Now I can use it as a drop mold. Before I put this slab in there though, I'm gonna go over it with some plastic wrap. Because this hasn't been fired yet, it's still got a little moisture to it and I don't want this slab to stick to my mold. So the plastic is just a simple barrier. I'm gonna put that on there. Okay. So instead of manually pushing this down, which you could do, but to make it more consistent throughout, I'm gonna just tap it on the table, kind of drop it on the table, and the slab is gonna more softly drape down in there. There's a little bit of excess here. I can already start to cut that off. So I know this might seem kind of big for a dinner plate, but remember, all of your pieces are gonna shrink 10%. And if you're using the red clay, they actually shrink more like 11%. So really think about what size you want your pieces to be and then make everything 10, 11, 12% bigger than that. So I'm gonna do a little more trimming on the sides here, just because I know all this is excess. But really, I'm gonna wait until it's stiffened up to cheese hard, and then I'm gonna come and finish that edge. And once this is firmed up, I'll be able to lift it off of this piece and it'll hold its shape, and then I can go ahead and drop another slab in here, and it'd be really easy to quickly make 6 or 7 or 8 plates like this that are all gonna be the same shape and size and all have the same curved rim, and they actually look really nice when they're stacked inside of each other too. So here's another drop mold form that I made a while ago, and this one I sent through the bisque firing, which is a great thing you can do if you want to be able to consistently use this mold shape again and again over months or years. You can go ahead and bisque fire it. I don't know if you're going to have time to be able to bisque fire your drop molds to use for this project, but you don't have to. You can just let it stiffen up to cheese hard and then it works just fine. And you can see the shape of the plate that this makes. And now I'm going to come and work more on this edge. A great tool for finishing the edges. If you can buy one extra tool for this class this term, get one of these little shaver blades. It's a Sureform tool and it's made by the Stanley Tool Company, and you can get them at any hardware store. It's like a little mini cheese grater but for clay. And it does wonders in cleaning up an edge. And you can easily just come across the edge and shave off little bumps and inconsistencies in a very even way. If you get it at the hardware store, you really only need this replacement blade part, but sometimes it comes with a plastic yellow handle. It's fun, it's quick, I highly recommend it. And then I'm gonna go around with wet fingertips. And I'm gonna finish and soften that edge. I'm gonna get rid of the rasp marks that the Sureform tool leaves. And I really want this edge to be rounded and soft to match the rounded soft quality of the plate itself. So I'm just dipping my fingers in water and using kind of the little pinched area in between my thumb and my first and second finger, and I'm going around that edge and softening what was really sharp and square and rough and raw looking, and I'm making it rounded and smoothed and compressed and finished looking. So I've gone around this whole edge and softened it and rounded it, and now I have to flip the piece upside down and work on the back side. The thing with dishes is you're going to be engaging with the back side of them when you wash it in the sink, when you stack it in the dishwasher. So this back area really needs the same level of attention and finish that the front side does. I'm going to put a second soft towel in there because I don't want this rim to press down at the table at all. I want to work on it suspended up on the air like this. And I'm going to come and finish the rim on the back side also. There's little areas back here where there's still bumps and shavings of clay, little areas that haven't been fully rounded yet. And the back side of the plate is often just as important as the front side. So a drop mold is nice if you want to make a more unique shape, if you want to make rounded shapes, maybe if you want to make larger shapes, but you can also make plates just by cutting shapes out of slabs and then folding the edges up. So this is a slab that I made yesterday, and I've had it loosely covered in plastic for about 24 hours. It's semi-stiff. It's kind of early cheese hard. It still has a lot of flexibility to it, so I can bend up the edges, but it's stiff enough that I can pick it up and flip it around and it's not going to totally distort. It's stiff enough that I can cut square edges out of it and not mush because the clay is too soft. Another good way to go about it is to cut the shape out of paper first and make a paper template that you can then put down on multiple slabs of clay to make sure they're all square or rectangular or round and they're all consistently the same size. I'm gonna cut a square here that's 5.5 by 5.5 to be sure that all of my plates are gonna be the same size and shape. So I'm gonna go ahead and smooth compress it one more time before I fold it up into a plate on both sides. So before I attach the corners together, I'm just going to get some of these initial bends. I'm going to go into each corner and slip and score those edges. I'm just using the tip of my knife here to slip and score. You could use the tip of your pin tool or a fork. And I'm going to go around and around and slip and score these joints multiple times. Scratch them all up. Get some water in there. Make a big mess. And then you can clean it up after you get them all stuck together. So I'm pressing hard enough to take the two edges of scratch marks, of score marks, and engage those score marks in with each other and make this more solid network of clay that's all joined together on the corners. You need to go back and forth with the score marks and really shove the teeth of clay that you've made in with each other, or else the joint will just be all loose and it'll fall apart. So then I'm going to go into the corners with some soft clay and reinforce all these joints. When I'm doing this blending, I'm further compressing the joint. I'm taking that corner area, which was really loose, and when I blend in this reinforcement clay, I'm making the joint more tight and more firm and more dense, and it's going to help prevent it from cracking. Now's when I'm doing the cleanup work that I talked about earlier when I said, you know, make a mess when you join your stuff together and then spend a lot of time cleaning it up afterwards. That way your joints will be really secure and you'll have really clean surfaces. So this is a nice way that you can also make a lot of plates that are a consistent shape and size, especially if you use a paper template to make them. Probably to really clean this up, I need to let it stiffen up to the next degree of cheese hard though. But I have one that I made yesterday on a larger scale. When I flip it upside down, I can see that these joints on the outside aren't finished yet, and I'm going to go in each one of them and put soft clay in there also and work that in. And then I'm going to come do a final swipe with my rubber rib and just further compress the clay and round it and blend it and smooth it. You don't have to use one of these rasp tools. If you don't have one, that's okay, but it really helps. And if you don't want to go and buy one, you can request one from Ian Beckett, and he will leave it outside for you to pick up curbside if you return it at the end of the term. And then again with wet fingertips over that so that it's smooth and finished and rounded. I think of the edge. That's what your eye is going to follow along as it goes around the piece. It's certainly the area that your hand is going to touch the most. The edge is where you have the most opportunity to put your particular touch on the piece. So I probably work on this plate a little bit more, but I might want to let it stiffen up to the next state of cheese hard first. It seems like this would be a good size for a dinner plate, but again, I know that it's going to be 10% smaller after the firing, so this might actually wind up to be more like a lunch plate or a sandwich plate size, because it's going to be smaller when it's fired. So you want your plates to have some kind of lift up off the table surface. You're not gonna just present the food on a perfectly flat slab. So here's a couple ways how to achieve that sense of lift. This one, even though it went flat on the table when I dropped the slab into that rim mold, now it has a little bit of a wobble to it, and I don't want that on my finished plate. Oftentimes throughout the firing and drying process, if there's any little bump on the backside at all, it's going to wobble, which I absolutely don't want. So one way to deal with that is just to make this underneath surface slightly concave. I'm going to come here with my rib and slightly indent the underneath of the plate. So slightly that it's not even really noticeable, because I don't want the plate to bow up on the inside. But sometimes if you just make it slightly concave, then it'll actually sit more level on the table. Another option would be to attach a foot on the bottom of this, which can turn this into more of a presentation, like a pedestal type piece. I'm going to slip and score the bottom of this area where the foot is going to get attached. Make score marks going in alternating directions, and then get some water down in those score marks also to soften up this clay and make it receptive. I want this foot ring to add more stability to the piece, so I have it attached out pretty wide. If you make the foot more narrow, it's not going to be very stable. This is probably the 7th or 8th time that I've gone around and scored it and put water in there, and it's just now starting to feel a little softer and more receptive. And that's when I know that I've done it enough to be able to add in the soft clay that I want. I'm going to put this in place, and I'm going to have this foot ring kind of echo the shape of the rim also, and go back and forth and in and out where the plate does itself. And now that I have it in the shape that I want, I'm going to start to more thoroughly engage this soft clay down into the score marks that I made. So I'm wiggling it back and forth, and I'm shoving it down into those score marks. And the whole time I have this dish supported on soft towels. You could also use something like crumpled newspaper underneath, because I don't want to press on this rim. That can make the piece crack. Whenever I attach a foot ring onto a piece, I like to make it as a continuous ring as opposed to 3 or 4 separate feet. Some people might envision attaching little balls of clay that would be as feet, but smaller individual feet tend to get knocked off really easily while the piece is drying, or maybe in the firing process, or even a few months or a few years later. They're just really prone to breaking off. So I always like to attach a continuous foot ring. Okay, so a simple way to think about making a cup shape is to take a slab and curl it around into a cylinder, attach it on the side, and then attach a floor on it. And you can certainly do that, but I want to show you some ways to make shapes that are a little more interesting than that, by starting with a straight-walled cylinder and then manipulating it or cutting sections out and folding it in different ways so that we can interact with this volume in different ways. We can give the cup a different stance on the table, a different gesture as it comes up off the table. So I like the diameter of this cylinder. I think I'm just gonna trim this side a little more neatly, and then I'm going to attach it together. When I wrap this around, The inside of this edge of the slab is going to just slightly overlap with the outside of that edge of the slab. I'm going to slip and score on the inner face over here and then on the outer face over here. And the same stuff with slipping and scoring, about going back and forth multiple times in multiple directions. Go deep into the wall of clay. Don't just make little light scratches on the surface. But once I feel like those two edges are soft and receptive, I'm going to join them together and I'm going to overlap this just slightly. And with my hand on the inside, I'm going to press that joint together. And on this piece, I'm going to leave the seam to show. I'm not going to totally blend it all in. Sometimes when you're cutting and seaming slabs together, it's nice to actually show where something is joined. I'm going to come and soften it and clean it up, but I'm going to let that seam show as the seam that it is. And if it's clean and soft, then it's not going to look unfinished. It's just going to show the natural building process that I've done in putting this together. And I'm pressing against my other hand, which is on the outside. So I can use a lot of pressure and not distort the shape of the piece. I'm going to cut a series of triangles out of this section of it, and I'm going to make what's called a dart in the piece. I'm going to start with a center line, and then on either side of that, I'm going to cut out a little triangle. I could cut a little bit more, maybe right here. So the more I cut off of these little triangle wedges out, the more this is going to come in together. And before I attach it, I'm going to kind of define that corner a little bit. I'm actually building this piece upside down right now. I'm pressing the edges of the joint together to make sure that it's a tight seam. I want to clean this up so that it looks finished and controlled, but I don't totally want to erase the fact that I did this darting and seaming on it. So I'm going to let these corners kind of show for what they are. And this is a cup that's going to have a rather narrow bottom, but I don't want it to be too tippy. So I have a slab here I'm going to attach it onto that's thicker than what I would normally have on a floor, because I want this piece to be a little weighted on the bottom. I really only need a pretty small foot. And then I can trace around where it's going to attach using my knife tip, almost like a pencil marking tool here. And I can see the shape of the foot that I need, so it's a little easier to cut it out this way. You do not want to have a gap on the inside of your cup where the wall meets the floor that could collect bacteria or just never really get cleaned out very well. So you want to make sure to go down in that with a coil of extra clay and seam that joint really well so there's no gaps or crevices in there. And I can further change the shape of this cup also, because the slab is really still pliable. So I can come on the inside and start to push it out. I'm going to give it a little slight swelling in the middle belly area here. So by swelling it out, I don't need to really change the overall dimensions, but I can give the piece a lot more capacity. To make it more stable, I'm going to actually make this slightly indented and slightly concave on the bottom. So I'll show you two ways how to make a handle, kind of one a variation on the other. To pull a smooth handle, I'm going to start with a tapered cone of clay. I'm going to roll it out on the table and try and make this as smooth and bump-free a cone as you can. This is probably 2 or 3 times as much clay as I actually need in the handle, but I'm going to grip up on the top part of the cone and pull on this bottom section of the cone, and this top part is just something for me to hang on to as I pull and stretch this out. Before I pull and stretch it out though, I'm going to flatten the cone a little bit so it's more like a strap instead of being totally rounded. So I'm going to hold it up on the fat part, and then my pulling hand is going to get the clay all wet with lots of water all around. And if you start with the shape of this little flattened cone pretty close to the shape of the handle that you want it to be, you don't need to do very much pulling. But the pulling is going to gently stretch the clay out, and it leaves a really smooth surface on it. So the shape of my pulling hand, depending on the shape of the handle I want, is sometimes flattened like this, sometimes more rounded. Usually I get my fingers in kind of a oval shape, and you can tell I'm working on one side, and then I turn it and I work on the back side. So on the front, on the back. This definitely takes practice to be able to do this and stretch it out the right amount and not have it rip. You want to use a lot of water. And pretty soon it's going to get to the length and the thickness that you want. I suggest if you're going to pull handles, go ahead and give yourself the freedom to pull maybe 3 or 4 first, just as practice. You just want to make sure that the side edges are smooth and rounded and that there's no sharp ridges on your handle at all. So this is kind of a long handle to help it hold its shape. I'm going to set it in a curve and just kind of set it aside and maybe let it firm up for 20 or 30 minutes. It'll help a lot. If you don't want to do so much pulling, here's a little way you can kind of cheat on a handle without having to do so much pulling. I'm just going to start with a small strip of a slab that's pretty close to the shape. So I like how wide this is. It's more than long enough, and I like how thick it is also. Maybe it's a little on the thick and wide side, so I'm just going to do a little bit of pulling on it. But you can, instead of having to hold it up in the air and get all the way around it to pull it, you can do some pulling with it laying down flat on the table. I'm going to come and wet stroke across the surface, and I'm holding my fingers on those corners of the little slab strip that I cut out to make it rounded all the way around. So by kind of gently lifting it up and wet stroking it while it's down on the table, I can do a lot of the smoothing and stretching without having to hold it up in the air. And this is a lot like the wet smoothing I did on the edge or rim of a plate. You know, you just want to come onto it with wet fingers and smooth and clean that surface. And that looks like a pretty nice pulled handle, and I did almost all of it laying down on the table. Again, I'm going to let that stiffen up in the curve that I want for a little while before I attach it. This is stiffened up just a little bit. So I'm going to cut that big wad of clay off the top. I can cut a little bit off the bottom. I'm going to just gently press that in right there. Then I'm going to try not to touch the smooth outside part of the handle because I don't want to get marks all over it. I can change the shape of it a little bit now before I really commit to it. And now I'm going to more firmly press that strap handle into the score marks that I made. And I've got some extra down here I can trim off. And this cup is all about showing off the seams, so I'm not gonna totally blend the clay in at the end of the strap handle. I'm just gonna make it clean and soft, but I'm gonna let it show that it's a separate strap that's been attached. I would just encourage you to make shapes that are beyond the basic straight-walled cylinder or round bowl dish beyond the basic flat disc for a plate. So think about how you can make some more unique shapes, how you can manipulate the sense of volume in the piece. If you want to leave your seams showing or not. But most important is to start actually with what food do you want to serve? What beverage do you want your pieces to hold? That's the main part of this project, is to make pieces that are specifically designed to your particular food or beverage. I also want to think about how all my pieces are designed to work together. So if this is the bowl shape and it's meant to go along with this cup shape, then what size or shape plate would best enhance these two objects so that the three objects together look like a cohesive set. You don't have to slab build your pieces. You could build these objects however you want. This is a pinch form that I've made, and it's stiffened up a little bit to the point now where I can stretch it out just a little bit more. I want to give this piece a little more capacity. So I'm putting my fingers in there and stretching out the clay wall. This just started as a humble little pinch pot yesterday, and it's been sitting overnight kind of loosely draped in plastic. There's something really warm and inviting about the pinch marks in the clay. So I wanted to do a series of pieces that had my pinch marks in it. So I'm going to keep stretching out the clay from the inside. I really want this bowl to have a sense of containment. So I really want it to curve back in on the rim. And now I'm also thinking about what else do I want to have with my soup bowls. Maybe I need a more open plate-like dish to have my salad off of at the same time. So I might design a more open dish that this could sit alongside of, or maybe as part of the presentation it would get stacked on top of it. But something that's going to enhance this oval shape that I already have, this rounded quality. And maybe I'll need a cup to go with that also. Or maybe I'll make a spoon out of clay to enhance this shape. You can make whatever you want for this project, whatever else you want to have on the table that would enhance your pieces that are going to be serving the food and beverage. So they all have the same rounded lower portion to them. So there's some repeated shapes, some repeated design elements into the various pieces in my series of tableware. I kind of feel like about half of this project is in the building them and the other half of it is in the design of them. And the design encompasses both how they relate to each other and also how they relate to the food that they're intended to serve. The design also involves how they relate to the human hand, what size they are, where are you supposed to pick them up, how comfortable are they to pick up. Whatever it is, that interaction between your dishes and the end user is an important part. So start by thinking about the food that you want to serve, the food or the beverage, whatever it is. It can be something as simple as toast and water, but whatever it is, think about the actual properties of that food, the size, the shape, the quantity of it that you eat, maybe the time of day that you eat it, the temperature of the food, the color, the texture of the food. All of these things can come into the dishes that you make. It's a way to engage with the surfaces and the shapes that you're going to make out of clay. Maybe it's a whole meal. Maybe it's a whole spread, like for serving sushi or a whole Italian dinner. Whatever it is, you're going to need certain size and shape dishes. And there might be other things that you want to have on the table also, like something to pour water out of, or a particular holder to hold the napkins that are going to be on the table. Whatever it is, you're going to have several pieces that are all on this stage set that you're going to orchestrate. You want to have the pieces be cohesive in design and do a good job of holding and serving the food. Your pieces should be finished all the way around, especially the rims. Any exposed edges of slabs need extra care and attention from you. Think about how the user is going to interact with your pieces. Have soft, smooth surfaces on everything. And look forward to being able to use all of this stuff at the end, because it's all going to be perfectly functional and food safe, and you're going to enjoy having these pieces for years to come.